Is it possible to capture pollution, store it underground and forget about it? The state government thinks it is, and it's investing millions of dollars into carbon capture research, as Gus Goswell reports.
It's touted as the future, a way to clean up coal and save jobs while saving the planet.
Carbon capture and storage allows us the opportunity to use brown coal at next to no emissions.
It's also been branded a pipe dream.
Clean coal, it's an oxymoron. We're years away, decades away from actually deploying this technology.
I believe it is viable.
If you're confused, you're not alone. The theory is that one day we'll be able to trap carbon emissions, take them away from the power plants and safely bury them deep below the ocean floor.
I think brown coal will continue to be part of the base load. People who want power instantaneously at a particular moment in time, when they switch on the power in a particular room, it needs to be generated at that exact moment in time. And of course solar and wind have some limitations in that way.
Early last month, the federal and state governments travelled to Victoria's Latrobe Valley, home to some of Australia's dirtiest power stations. They announced $100 million in carbon capture and storage feasibility research through the CarbonNet project.
We need to do our homework. We need to get the answers to make sure that what works on paper will work in the real world.
There's hundreds of years' worth of brown coal in the Latrobe Valley, possibly up to 700 years' worth. So it's hardly surprising that governments are looking at new ways to use brown coal. There's plenty of people keen to spruik the benefits of carbon capture and storage technology in the Latrobe Valley. But many who work in one of the valley's power stations have serious doubts about the technology. Even the proponents of CCS concede it's in its infancy.
To get this technology through to commercialisation, we're probably looking at something in the order of 15 years.
That view is shared by others with a detailed understanding of the technology. Craig Dugan heads a company involved in CCS research at the Hazelwood Power Station.
If you look at putting carbon dioxide back in the ground, that generates a lot of anxiety. But in fact, most people would be surprised to understand that natural gas is being re-injected into the ground for gas storage under almost identical conditions here in Victoria and in many, many places around the world.
Green groups aren't convinced.
There is a community safety concern around the ability to store very, very large amounts of carbon dioxide underground indefinitely.
There's been a lot of work already gone into the Otways project, where you've seen 65,000 tonnes of CO2 injected 2 kilometres underground and stored safely.
While concerns about safe storage are being debated publicly, what's not widely understood is that CCS may only work in new power stations.
It's difficult to retrofit carbon capture to existing power plants because often the space is not there, the utilities for the plants is often not available. So ideally it is better off to build these carbon capture plants on new power plants.
The Mayor of Latrobe City, where thousands of people work in power stations, isn't fazed by that. Would you be comfortable with the prospect of new power stations being built in the Latrobe Valley?
Oh, absolutely. Our mantra is jobs, jobs, jobs. And I believe that our constituency here in Latrobe City and Central Gippsland, and indeed wider Gippsland, is certainly in favour of continuing our crucial position in power generation.
I can't see new coal-fired power plants being built anywhere in Australia, and if you speak to anyone in the finance community, they certainly won't back it, so it would have to be some crazy government plan.
But there's already government money, and lots of it, on the table for a proposed new power station in Victoria. The energy company HRL wants to build a new coal and gas-fired power station at Morwell. The Environment Protection Authority has approved a plant only half the size HRL wanted. Both HRL and Green Groups are challenging that decision in Victoria's Planning Tribunal.
Stop HRL! No more coal!
CCS research funds have also been allocated to the Yallourn Power Station, which is one of 3 Latrobe Valley generators that could be paid to close under the federal government's carbon pricing plan. Green Groups argue that in such an uncertain climate, CCS can't be relied upon.
I'm sure that we could do it if we threw enough money at it, but I'm sure that there'll also be much cheaper clean energy options which will be available much sooner than carbon capture and storage ever will be.
When you look at what the International Energy Agency says about the importance of carbon capture and storage, when you look at what Federal Treasury says in the carbon tax modelling, both those organisations say that if we're to meet global emission targets by 2050, carbon capture and storage must be up and running.
730 has been told by people within the coal industry that the federal government's carbon price of $23, due to come in later this year, will have to be ratcheted up if CCS is to become commercially viable.
Carbon capture at the moment is generally accepted. It costs about $60 a tonne to capture CO2 and put it into the ground. So the idea of the research is to find improved ways or improved processes that can reduce that cost and make it a viable alternative.
The CSIRO, the federal government's own research organisation, which is heavily involved in CCS trials, couldn't be blunter on this point.
CCS is not commercial even at the carbon price set for Australia this year, but neither is solar or geothermal or wind. All these technologies will require a higher carbon price to become commercially viable.
Critics argue taxpayers are footing an unfair share of the research bill.
Government's the only financial backer of carbon capture and storage projects in the Latrobe Valley. So despite the fact that the coal industry is spruiking carbon capture and storage as the solution, they're not putting their money where their mouth is.
Look, that's not true. If I look at the contribution that Loy Yang has made, we're certainly into the many millions of dollars from that point of view.
Despite the uncertainties, the Victorian government believes CCS will play a crucial role in the state's energy supply.
Carbon capture and storage allows us the opportunity to use brown coal at next to no emissions, which is good for the environment and certainly good for the economy.
But you're speaking as though the technology's been proven. It hasn't.
Well, carbon capture and storage has worked in other circumstances, but Victorian brown coal is a bit of a unique resource in some ways.
Governments, both state and federal, have not woken up to the fact that if we're going to respond properly and seriously to the threat that climate change presents, nearly all of that coal is going to need to remain in the ground forever.